Hello there, faithful listener. You've tuned in to Season 7 of the Bible Explained podcast. So make sure to grab your cup of coffee, because today we are going to be discussing the book of 2 Samuel. Good morning, friends and faithful listeners. This is Jen with the Bible Explained podcast. I'm excited that you tuned in to share a cup of coffee or a cup of tea with me this morning as we read through 2 Samuel 14, 1 through 21. I'm excited to talk about today's portion of scripture because it's about reconciliation, and it's also just a really weird and interesting story that not a lot of people remember or talk about. So we'll be talking about that today. Once again, this is 2 Samuel 14, 1 through 21. I'll be reading it out of the WEB. Now Joab the son of Zeruiah perceived that the king's heart was toward Absalom. Joab sent to Tekoa and brought a wise woman from there and said to her, "Please act like a mourner and put on mourning clothing, please, and don't anoint yourself with oil, but be as a woman who has mourned a long time for the dead. Go into the king and speak to him like this." So Joab put the words in her mouth. When the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, she fell on her face to the ground, showed respect, and said, "Help, O king." The king said to her, "What ails you?" She answered, "Truly I am a widow, and my husband is dead. Your servant had 2 sons, and they both fought together in the field, and there was no one to part them, but the one struck the other and killed him. Behold, the whole family has risen against your servant, and they say, 'Deliver him who struck his brother, that we may kill him for the life of his brother whom he killed, and so destroy the heir also.' Thus they would quench my coal which is left, and would leave to my husband neither name nor remainder on the surface of the earth." The king said to the woman, "Go to your house, and I will give a command concerning you." The woman of Tekoa said to the king, "My lord, O king, may the iniquity be on me and on my father's house, and may the king and his throne be guiltless." The king said, "Whoever says anything to you, bring him to me, and he will not bother you any more." Then she said, "Please let the king remember Yahweh your God, that the avenger of blood destroy not any more, lest they destroy my son." He said, "As Yahweh lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the earth." The woman said, "Please let your servant speak a word to my lord the king." He said, "Say on." The woman said, "Why then have you devised such a thing against the people of God? For in speaking this word, the king is as one who is guilty, in that the king does not bring home again his banished one. For we must die, and are like water spilled on the ground, which can't be gathered up again. Neither does God take away life, but devises means, that he who is banished not be an outcast from him. Now therefore, seeing that I have come to speak this word to my lord the king, it is because the people have made me afraid. Your servant said, I will now speak to the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his servant. For the king will hear, to deliver his servant out of the hand of the man who would destroy me and my son together out of the inheritance of God." Then your servant said, "Please let the word of my lord the king bring rest. For as an angel of God, so is my lord the king to discern good and bad. May Yahweh, your God, be with you." Then the king answered the woman, "Please don't hide anything from me that I ask you." The woman said, "Let my lord the king now speak." The king said, "Is the hand of Joab with you in all of this?" The woman answered, "As your soul lives, my lord the king, no one can turn to the right hand or to the left from anything that my lord the king has spoken. For your servant Joab urged me, and he put all these words in the mouth of your servant. Your servant Joab has done this thing to change the face of the matter. My lord is wise, according to the wisdom of an angel of God, to know all things that are in the earth." The king said to Joab, "Behold now, I have done this thing. Go therefore and bring the young man Absalom back." So in the last chapter, you remember that Absalom killed his oldest brother, Amnon. Amnon was the one that was in line for becoming the next king of Israel. He was the oldest son of David. And because Amnon had raped Absalom's true sister, Tamar, Absalom hated Amnon because of that. So Absalom devised this plan, took a long time to figure it out, 2 whole years actually, to eventually kill Amnon. And in the last chapter, that came to fruition. So Amnon died and Absalom fled because he was afraid for his life after that. So it says that some time passed because Absalom, I think, was in Jeshurun, hiding away from David for several years. I can't remember if it said 2 or 3 years, but it was several years that it took place. And so now Joab, David's commander, is getting irritated that David doesn't bring Absalom back from Jeshurun. Because here's what it says. Now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was toward Absalom. This means that David was longing to see Absalom. In fact, in the last chapter, it actually mentioned that. It said that David was mourning for his son Absalom every day, wishing to see him. But David was doing nothing about it. He wasn't going to see Absalom at all. He was just kind of like sitting on this problem, and it was affecting the way David was thinking. And so Joab was getting frustrated, being the commander of David's armies, seeing David in mourning over his son Absalom. So Joab devises this scheme to try to get David to bring Absalom back home to Israel. It says that Joab sent to Tekoa and brought a wise woman from there and said to her, act like a mourner and put on mourning clothing and don't anoint yourself with oil, and then go see King David, and I will tell you everything that you should say to King David. And this woman, it actually calls her a wise woman, meaning she had a reputation in this area of Tekoa that she lived in for being somebody who was just wise, somebody who gave good advice maybe, somebody who just had a reputation of being intelligent. And her name isn't mentioned, but somehow Joab ends up hearing about her. And so he sends for her to trick David into bringing Absalom home again. And the woman agrees to do it because it was actually in Israel's interest that Absalom come back home, if that makes sense. Fighting in a royal family is a very, very bad thing for the entire country, because Absalom might rebel. He might be angry that he has to live in Jeshurun instead of living in Israel when he was an Israelite. So it was actually in Israel's best interest that Absalom come back home. And so this woman is willing to do this very scary task. She is willing to trick King David and possibly get punished for this trickery that she does. But she's willing to do it for the sake of Israel. So the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, and she looked disheveled. She looked like she was in mourning. And it says that she fell on her face to the ground and showed respect and said, "Help, O king." And of course, King David is going to see her, and he's going to feel sympathy, right? Because she is a woman who is a widow. We don't know how old she is, but a lot of people think that she's old because it says that she's wise. So she could have been an older woman also. And she has this problem. So King David hears her case. And this was not uncommon for people, like an average person, to bring their cases to the king. And King David could probably accept to hear them or choose not to accept to hear them. David accepts her case. So he says, "What ails you?" She answered, "Truly, I am a widow and my husband is dead." And that might be actually the case. It is very possible that this woman was actually a widow. Now, the question arises, did this woman lie? Was the story completely fabricated by her and Joab, or was there some truth to it? We'll talk about that in a second. She says, "Truly, I am a widow and my husband is dead. Your servant had 2 sons and they both fought together in a field, and there was no one to part them, but the one struck the other and killed him." So she had 2 sons. They got into a fight out in the fields, and she said, one of them killed the other one. So not only did I lose my husband, but I lost a son because my other son killed him because they got into this stupid fight. She says, "The whole family has risen against your servant, and they say, 'Deliver him who struck his brother.'" Now, what this is referring to is the whole avenger of blood thing that Israel used to do. If somebody killed somebody, whether it was purposeful or manslaughter, meaning it was a mistake, the avenger of blood would go and kill that person. And the avenger of blood was somebody that was close to the person who died. And if this woman was older, and she had 2 older sons, the one that died could have been married, and maybe the wife had a family member that was close to her that became the avenger of blood. And so the avenger of blood would go and kill the brother that killed her husband. And so this woman is pleading with King David. She's saying, my family has risen against me with this whole avenger of blood thing. And they're saying for me to bring out my son so that they can kill him because he killed his brother. She says, this would quench my coal which is left and would leave to my husband neither name nor remainder on the surface of the earth. So she's like, I would have nothing left. And my husband's name would be completely forgotten if my other son was to die. Because yes, my son did kill my other son. But now all I have left is my son that was a murderer. Please don't let him die too, because I would have truly nothing left. And then, of course, my husband's name would be completely erased. So David says to the woman, go to your house and I will give a command concerning you. So he hears the case and he's like, okay, I will give a command about this case. So the woman actually presses him. And she's like, what's the command going to be? She says to the king, my lord, O king, may the iniquity be on me and my father's house, and may the king and his throne be guiltless. So she is kind of laying on the flattery on King David. And so King David says to her, whoever says anything to you, bring him to me, and he will not bother you anymore. And she once again pressures him. And she says, please let the king remember Yahweh your God, that the avenger of blood not destroy any more, lest they destroy my son. So she pressures David into saying exactly what she wants to hear, that her son is not going to die for murdering her other son. David said, as Yahweh lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the earth. He says, I will protect your son. And that is exactly what this woman wanted to hear. So when she hears this command from King David, she jumps on it. And here's what she says. Please let your servant speak a word to my lord the king. So she says, let me say one more thing to you, David. And he says, go on. She says, why have you devised such a thing against the people of God? So she's basically like, why have you done evil against the people of Israel? Man, this woman was bold. I can see now why people call her wise, because can you imagine saying this to a king, that he did something bad to the nation? Can you imagine saying that? Like, that would be terrifying, especially back in these days, when kings had all the power. She's speaking extremely boldly to him. She's like, you've done something bad to Israel. She says, for in speaking this word, the king is as one who is guilty. She's like, you're a hypocrite. You say to me, oh, my son is okay. My son murdered my other son, but that's okay. You're a hypocrite because you haven't brought back your banished son. She says, we must all die, and we are like water spilled on the ground, which can't be gathered up again. So look, David, your son is not going to be around forever. You're not going to be around forever. We all die. And when that happens, we can't take back what has happened. So if Absalom dies, that's it. You're not going to be able to be reconciled to him at any point in time ever again. Or if you die, Absalom can never get reconciled to you again. So do it now when you're still alive. And then I love what she says right here. Neither does God take away life, but devises means that he who is banished not be an outcast from him. That is a beautiful verse. And let me read that actually out of the NLT version. It says, God does not just sweep life away. Instead, he devises ways to bring us back when we have been separated from him. So she reminds David about how God forgives. God is always forgiving us. He doesn't just kill people when they turn their backs on him. Instead, he actually thinks up ways of how to reconcile with us, is what she says. So this woman truly was a wise woman. So God is always trying to bring the banished back to him. He's always trying to forgive and to pull us closer to him. She reminds David of that. And she says, you have to emulate God, because if God forgives and brings people back to him, why haven't you forgiven your son? Why haven't you brought your son back? Now, therefore, seeing that I have come to speak this word to my lord the king, it is because the people have made me afraid. Your servant said, I will now speak to the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his servant. So this brings into question, was this woman just making things up, or did this actually happen in her family? Because it is possible that Joab actually found a wise woman who truly was a widow and who truly had 2 sons where one of them killed the other one, and who actually was getting harassed by her family members to bring her son out. Because that's kind of what she says here. She kind of says, I've been afraid because the people around me have made me afraid. And she actually says that there is a man who was harassing her. She says, for the king will hear to deliver his servant out of the hand of the man who would destroy me and my son together out of the inheritance of God. So it sounds like this woman did not lie. It sounds like she really did have this problem, that there really was an avenger of blood trying to kill her son. It actually sounds like Joab found a woman who truly did have this problem. And that's what I personally think. Now, there is a case that this woman truly was just lying the entire time and making up the whole thing, even this part right here, and didn't come clean about it until David asked her. And then she's like, oh yeah, it all was a lie. It is possible, but I actually think that this woman really was going through this, and Joab happened to find her, and she happened to have a good reputation, and she was trying to figure out this issue that she had, and Joab gave her an opportunity to actually bring it in front of the king. And maybe that was an incentive for her to actually listen to Joab and put her life on the line potentially for boldly saying that the king had screwed over Israel. So it is possible that's the reason that this woman actually did this, was because she had an incentive, because she had a serious problem that she hoped David would figure out. But anyway, she ends her speech to David, and David's like, okay, tell me one thing. And the woman's like, what is it, my lord, the king? He says, did Joab put you up to all this? She says, yeah. She's like, as your soul lives, my lord, the king, no one can turn to the right hand or to the left from anything that my lord, the king has spoken. So she's like, yes, in like the most flowery language possible. She says, Joab did actually put this up to me. She says, your servant Joab urged me. He put all these words in my mouth. Your servant Joab has done this thing to change the face of the matter. So that's where people think that maybe this woman was lying the entire time, that Joab thought up this entire situation. But the reason why I think that this woman truly did have a problem on her hands is because I don't think anybody could pay me enough to go in front of a king who had all of the power in the world to chop your head off and tell him that he messed Israel up. Unless I had a truly bad problem that I needed help with. That is why I think this woman actually had the issue that she had and did not lie about it. And Joab just told her what to tell the king, if that makes sense. She says, my lord is wise according to the wisdom of an angel of God to know all these things that are here on the earth. So she once again flatters him, because this was dangerous what this woman was doing. Now, thankfully, David was not one to just chop people's heads off. In fact, he never did. He was a very kind king, but David was kinder to his own subjects than he was to his family, unfortunately. And I think that this is what that woman was really getting at. She's saying, you are more kind to your subjects than you are to your own son, and you have to be kind to your son. Otherwise, this might destroy Israel, because your son might retaliate. So the king says to Joab, after he hears that Joab was behind all this, behold, now I have done this thing. Go therefore and bring the young man, Absalom, back. So finally, David gives the command to Joab to bring Absalom back. And I'm sure Joab couldn't have been happier that David is finally going to be around his son again, because the reason Joab did all of this was because he could see that David had changed, and he did not like the change that he saw in David. So Joab and all of Israel is probably hoping that bringing Absalom back was going to be good for Israel. But we'll learn that that's not actually the case. We'll talk about all of that on Friday and next week, as well as we delve more into Absalom and David's story. But really, I don't think that this woman was wrong in telling David to bring his son back, because she's absolutely right, especially the verse where it says that God forgives people and brings them back and tries to restore a relationship with them. Because God does that, we should also be emulating that as well to the best that we can possibly do. Now, there are times when God will actually reject people. We talked about that actually yesterday on the podcast, that God does reject certain people because they have completely abandoned him. But for the most part, God is always trying to pull people towards him. He's always trying to restore relationships. So as much as we can, we should be trying to do the same thing. We can't always restore relationships with people, but we can at least have peace with those people and forgive them in our own hearts. Anyway, faithful listeners, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please share it on your social media platforms. Don't forget that tomorrow we are not going to be having an episode because it's 4th of July. And I'm going to be going to my local parade because I know some kids that are in it, and I'm going to be excited to see them in the floats, and they promised to throw candy at me. So that's the main reason why I'm going. As an adult, I don't get the candy thrown at me anymore. It's always thrown to the little kids. So now I get to actually have candy thrown at me because I know some kids that are in the parade. And that's the main reason why I'm going. I get some candy at the parade. All right, faithful listeners, I will see you all on Friday. Have a fantastic 4th of July. Happy listening, and God bless.